Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Obviously can't talk to me, but hi. So my name's Andy Charlton. I'm an engineer on the storage team. We're responsible for making sure all your data gets written successfully and all your queries and things get responded to promptly. So I've been on the storage team for about 6 months. I should say storage team is primarily works for Cloud 2. Now, I've been here 6 months, and over the last 6 months, I think it's fair to say that the scale of Cloud 2 has grown quite considerably. We've launched several new clusters. All of our existing clusters have scaled quite dramatically. I think a lot of people are seeing that Cloud 2 is providing a great technical and economic solution, and a lot of people are jumping on board. So, as part of that scaling and part of that kind of as we've grown, we obviously need to monitor our systems. Monitoring is one of the ideal use cases for Influx, and we're great proponents of dog fooding here at Influx. So obviously, when we need to monitor our systems, we use Influx. We have several clusters now dedicated to monitoring our systems, our Cloud 2 systems, and we use dashboards, alerts, and tasks extensively to help us monitor our production clusters and make sure everything's working for you. Okay. Now, I think we're probably in a position a lot of companies are in. These things start to grow organically. You start adding dashboards, you start adding tasks, and over time, these things grow, and as we scaled, we've started to hit some slight edge cases in AWS or Google Cloud Platform or whatever. And we start to realize we need more alerts. We start to identify additional kind of precursors to situations that we don't want to get in. So our monitoring, our usage of tasks has grown quite considerably as we've scaled. And so today I wanted to talk to you about some of the lessons we've learned and some of the tooling we've developed to make that whole process a little bit easier. So I'd like to talk to you about just how we manage our dashboards, our tasks, our alerts, and so on. Okay. Now, on the way to that, I'd like to make a kind of slight diversion, just talk a little bit, give a little bit of an introduction into a kind of related concept, infrastructure as code. Okay. Now, this is, I'll apologize for those of you, the expression in English is teaching granny to suck eggs. I don't know if that's universal. Chris is looking at me oddly. It probably isn't. But for those of you who know all this, I'll apologize. But I think it's important to kind of give a reasonable introduction so everybody's at a reasonable level. So infrastructure as code has really taken off as a concept in software engineering in the last, I'm going to say 15 years. And what it is very simple. It's the process of managing and provisioning computer infrastructure through machine-readable files. Now, I had a little bit of history on this. Puppet is probably one of the first tools. Somebody will no doubt correct me, and there'll be a precursor in 2001 or something. But Puppet was certainly one of the very first widely accepted tools to do. That was 2005. Chef 2009. AWS brought out CloudFormation 2011. Terraform, HashiCorp Terraform 2014. These things have been around quite a long time. Infrastructure as code has become, I'd say, the normal now in a lot of certainly cloud environments. And it is all about how we manage our infrastructure. And we want to describe our infrastructure in code, in text files. Over time, we've gone from imperative kind of files. We've moved away from Python and Ruby code that tells us how to scale things up or how to provision a service. And we've gone to more declarative text, YAML files, JSON, JSONet, HashiCorp language, HCL, which tells us this is what we want our system to look like. And the tooling has grown to work out what it looks like, how to get from state to state. So what we want to be able to do is describe our system in code and have that code make our system, essentially provision our system. And there are reasons why this is advantageous. We can automate our deployment. As an engineer, I really don't want to go into the AWS console and start clicking buttons to provision an EC2 instance or similar. Things like that. User error is almost always the root of things going wrong. If we can eliminate that as best we can, that's great. So being able to automate our deployments, not having people clicking things in consoles and so on, that's excellent. That's a great advantage. If our CI/CD pipeline can just make our code, turn our code into services that are running, excellent. Having our infrastructure described as code, I think, gives us better visibility about what is going on in our system, what it looks like. Again, I don't want to be in AWS. I keep picking on AWS. Any cloud provider is the same, really. But I don't really want to be there clicking in all the different consoles to work out how many EC2 instances, how many S3 buckets, or similar. If I can look in the code and it can say, right, we've got this bucket, we've got this many replicas of this pod, or whatever it is. That's great. It lets us have better visibility into our system. Obviously, when we start talking about text as well, we can reuse things. We can, very simple level, we can just copy paste things over and we can reuse bucket definitions and so on. If I'm working in a multi-cloud environment and I want to be able to, or if I've got multiple environments like Influx clusters or so on, and I want to provision the same dashboards, the same alerts, the same tasks, being able to reuse the same templates, the same files helps an awful lot. And I think one of the massive advantages of infrastructure as code for me is the ability to version. Having things written in text allows us to use tools like Git, Mercurial, and so on, and version our code and our infrastructure. And that means if we make mistakes, if we make errors, we can always roll back. It gives us a history of what has changed over time. So versioning is hugely important, and particularly when we've got automated deployments, making rollbacks, making changes is really, really straightforward. So hopefully there's some reasons why we might want to use infrastructure as code. But I guess some of the questions behind it, right? We've talked about what code is. It's probably some YAML these days. We know why we might want to do it, but what really is infrastructure? Now, there are some really obvious ones. If I want to provision a server, it's almost physical. I can imagine that's infrastructure. When we talk of infrastructure outside of computer, like engineering, we talk about bridges and things like that, physical hard things. So servers, storage, disks, buckets. And obviously we start to get to more ephemeral things, my networking policies, my access control, like IAM roles, all those kind of things. Slightly more ephemeral, but really still infrastructure. And then then the question is, dashboards, alerts, should we consider them infrastructure? And I would very strongly recommend you, yes, I think they are, because they are things that we rely on. If we need to know that our systems are working, they're running, and we are using our alerts, we need our dashboards up for when things go wrong, and to help us trace down the problem. These things are absolutely critical to what we do. Okay, so I think they are just as important in many respects as the servers and everything else, because without them, we don't know if our product, our service, is working. So given that we want to include our dashboards, our alerts in our infrastructure, we want to think about those, we want to transform those into code. Okay, we need to have a think about the tooling. Obviously, for other bits of the stack, there are things like CloudFormation, Terraform, and so on. The appropriate tools for the dashboards, alerts, well, there's an Influx CLI tool. I'll show you a demo in a minute, how we can use this. And in the storage team, we've also developed a stack manager tool, which will be available at that GitHub repo. I'll push the button shortly after this to release it to the public. And so there's a couple of tools, and I'm going to demonstrate exactly how we can use those now to manage our dashboards, our alerts, and so on. Okay.
So here I am in Cloud 2 with just a test organization. I have a dashboard to show off my system monitoring stats. I have a task that does some downsampling, my CPU stats every 10 minutes, and so on. And I want to get these things, my dashboard, my task, under version control. Now, I can manually go and export these things. If I click the button there, I can get a JSON representation of the different cells and all the flux queries and so on within my dashboard. But we talked earlier about automation. I don't want to have to manually go and do these things all the time. I don't want every time I make changes, I don't want to have to export. And I want to be able to push changes up. So just clicking these things manually, it isn't really a scalable solution. So we're going to move to the terminal and the Influx CLI tool. Now, just before we start, I'll just show you that I've got an Influx config set up. Now this handles all of the auth, contains my token and so on, so that I don't need to export those things or add them as command line flags to my commands. If you haven't used configs, I'd recommend them. Okay. My config for my stack demo org, this will be used for everything we do for the rest of this demo. Now, we want to be able to group together all of my dashboards, my tasks, so I can export them, change them in one go. And a stack is just that. It's a grouping of dashboards, tasks, alerts, labels, all of those things that we can create in the UI. A stack can group those things together. Now, currently I don't have a stack in this organization, so I'm going to create one. I'll give it a name and I'll give it a description. Oh, excellent typing today. So there we go. We have a new stack. So name. We'll see it's got no resources. We'll have to add those in a second. And it has an ID. We will use this ID an awful lot, so I'm going to just export that to make our lives a little bit easier. Okay. Now we can also use the influx command to list our dashboards and list our tasks. And as expected, we've got a single system dashboard, we've got a single CPU usage downsample task. So let's add those to our stack. So I'm going to update my stack. I'm going to add a resource to it, a dashboard, which is this one, and I'm going to add a task, which is this guy. Okay, so now we can see our stack has got 2 resources. At this point, we're being asked if we want to export a new template. I'm just going to say no for now, and we'll do that explicitly. So let's do that. Let's export a stack ID, and let's do it to file so we can browse it and make our lives a little bit easier. So we've exported it to a template file, and let's have a look at that. So the template we get from a stack contains everything within it. It's a YAML file with multiple documents in. Here we've got our task, and here we've got our dashboard. The template contains everything within there. For our task, a task is a simple thing. It just tells us when to run it and what the query is, really. A dashboard, obviously more complicated, that has multiple charts, each of which have queries, have axes, colors, and all these kind of things attached to it. Okay. So if we wanted to, we could just work with this single template. I can add that to my, I can commit that to my Git repo, and we can say, right, I've got my template, I've got my dashboards and my tasks under version control. If we make changes, we can pull them down, we can re-export. So let's I'll So if I update my dashboard and I export my template again, we'll see it gets updated. We can start taking diffs. We can look at the changes that occur. Equally, if I update my template, so let's say instead of running my task every 10 minutes, I decide I'm going to run it every hour, and I'm going to sample the last hour's worth of data and still window it in 5-minute chunks, but I'm only going to run it once an hour and do it all in one go. So I've updated my task, and if I want to now, I can apply those changes to my stack. The Influx tool is nice. It gives us a little summary of what's changed. If we change Flux in minor details, it won't tell us exactly what's changing. But for the purpose of big things like the cycle and so on, or the number of charts in the dashboard, it'll give us a description of what's changing. I'm happy with this change, so I'm going to confirm it. And if we now go to our tasks, we can see, yep, this is now scheduled to run every hour, and it will start, it will range from an hour ago. And that's great. We can start committing, we can start adding our changes in, we can start pushing those up to GitHub or wherever and reviewing them. But as we found in the storage team, that only works to a certain extent. This setup we've got here is probably about as simple as you'd want to get away with. Okay, I have 12 cells in here, each with maybe 6 lines of flux on any individual one. My task, I have a single task, and again it's got about, it's 5-6 lines of flux. And yet if we look at our template, that generates 351 lines of YAML. Once we start adding multiple dashboards, multiple tasks, once the Flux starts getting a little bit more complicated, it's pretty easy to see that we'd straight away we're starting to talk about thousands, tens of thousands of lines of YAML. Now, YAML scares me a little bit. From experience, maybe it's just my personal bad experience, but I end up adding white space in the wrong places and so on, and it goes horribly wrong. Equally, if I'm editing this or I'm reviewing this, I don't really want to be editing Flux inline in a bit of YAML. It's just not pleasant. And certainly when you've got massive YAML files, if I start editing some of this, you know, let's say I change this line and I add a stop. It's not obvious to me. So if I change that and I pushed it up and asked somebody to have a look at this, because we want our changes to our dashboards and things to be reviewed, it's actually not obvious. GitHub will probably give you 5-10 lines either side of this change. It's not obvious what dashboard it belongs to. It's not obvious what chart it belongs to, just simply because there's a lot of stuff there, okay, within this single template. So in the storage team, we had a look at this problem. We thought, you know, we can do a little bit better than that. We can make this template a bit more easy to work with and review and edit. Okay. So we built a tool which we call the Stack Manager, which I've got installed, and I will show you exactly what that does. So what I'm going to do is pull down my stack using the InfluxDB Stack Manager. Okay. And if we have a look what that has created, it has taken that individual template, which had the dashboard and a task, and has split that up into multiple templates, which is the kind of first optimization. We can start looking at, when I make a change to an individual template, I can see much easier what is being changed. If we look at our task, we've got a template there. That's fairly straightforward. The only difference from the bigger template, that subsection, is this line here, this query line. And what we've done is just take out the actual query and stick it in its own individual Flux file. The Flux team has built excellent tools for your editor and so on, you know, language servers, syntax highlighting. Working with Flux in your editor is actually, it's a nice experience. So if we can split these things into Flux, individual Flux files, we can take advantage of all of that. So our task has been separated. It's its own template. It's the query, the Flux has been extracted from there. And hopefully now we can start editing that and working with it in a more straightforward manner. Our dashboard, a dashboard is obviously a more complicated thing than a template. A task. It has multiple cells, each with potentially multiple queries. Okay. So in a dashboard, we do something very similar though. We have the dashboard template. And for each chart, we can see our queries have been replaced with essentially a link to a file. So my template, my disk, this is a chart with the name, a cell with the name disk usage. It's of XY type, so like a scatter plot, and that links to this disk usage XY flux. And what this allows us to do, just by extracting the flux, like simplifying the template, just makes our lives a little bit easier. Okay, so let's do the same again. Let's just commit that, and again let's go and change some things. So let's go and have a look at my board. Now, whenever I look at CPU usage, idle always strikes me as It's always just a bit left over from it. This is probably the interesting bit to me. Idle seems to be always just the leftover bit. So I've decided I'm not interested in usage idle. So let's update our board and get rid of that. If I now do a stack pull, we've now got a change, and hopefully that's a little bit easier to understand what's being changed. If I push those changes up to GitHub, I could see, well, actually it's the system dashboard, it's the CPU usage cell with the scatter plot, and yeah, that makes sense. We've taken that away. Okay. Equally, just as before, we can make changes locally. We can, if I'm editing these things, I can push those changes up. Let's make a bigger change because we can. Let's duplicate this task, and let's have a disk usage downsample as well. So let's just change the metadata name so we don't get a collision. Let's change the name so it's disk usage downsample, and then let's have a look at the query. Obviously I don't want my measurement is CPU. Let's change that to disk. And if we now push our stack, we can see the stack manager tool is very much just a thin layer over the Influx CLI tool. It just transforms the single large template into something more manageable and back again. Okay, so we get all of the niceness from the Influx CLI tool. We get this summary just as we did before to say, right, we've added a new task. So yeah, let's add that. We like that. And we can see the changes we've made are there. We've got our new disk usage downsample task, measurement disk. Okay. So hopefully there I've shown you how you can pull the definition of all of your dashboards, your tasks, how you can make changes to those, how you can push them back up. Okay. The Influx CLI tool, the Influx Stack Manager tool, sorry, is there, released open source now. If you want to use it, if you think that will help make managing your files easier, we've certainly found in the storage team it's helped us a lot managing everything. Okay. All right.
So I should also say that if you've got your individual Flux files there, we also have tooling to allow you to run those. In the Influx CLI will allow you to run those against Influx and get your results and so on. So you can work in the terminal in your editor pretty nicely, just as well as you can in the cloud. Obviously, if you want to use ER, that is a great solution as well. So feel free to go either way. Now, I thought we've had a couple of questions about in the Influx community Slack about workflow, and this is again something we've kind of. Can I go back, Gabe? Sorry about that. So we've had a couple of questions about workflow, and it's very much a question of whether we primarily pull our data down or whether we push it back up. And the question ultimately comes to, what is your source of truth? And I think with infrastructure as code, the overwhelming kind of thought has gone to really a push model, that your source of truth is your code, the text files that are sitting in a repo somewhere. That is your source of truth, and the push model is preferred for all kinds of infrastructure. That slightly kind of underestimates how much easier it is, certainly when you're building dashboards and things like that, how much easier that is to do in the UI. So we've kind of come to a little bit of a compromise there about if we're building things in the UI, if we are doing that kind of work where it's a lot easier just doing it in the UI, then we do it there and we pull our changes down. To be honest, a lot of the time when we're building new tasks or changing tasks, we can change those and we pull the changes down. The agreement we've come to, certainly in the storage team though, is the repo, the code is our source of truth. And if you are making changes, you do them, but in the UI, but with the understanding that they may be overwritten at some point when we push things back up. Thankfully, the storage team is small enough, and we've gotten to a point where our dashboards and tasks are static enough that that's not a big issue. But I think that's very much something to kind of to work out amongst your teams. But we've come to a kind of hybrid model. But that's I think that's something for teams to work out as they go. So, but both work, either pulling them down and keeping your repo as a backup, or having your repo as the absolute kind of fundamental source of truth. So, with that, I think we've got about 10 minutes left for questions. So, the software license on the Stack Manager tool and our contributions welcome from the community. Yes, absolutely. So the software license on the Stack Manager tool, it's going to be released. I'm going to open that publicly in the next hour or so. That is MIT licensed, and any contributions would be most welcome. We obviously use it internally. We've been using it internally for a while. Some of the other teams have picked it up and been using it internally. So it fits our use cases, but we appreciate there's probably other things that the community might want to see. So if you want to contribute, then that would be very welcome. Okay. What are the prerequisites for using the Stack Manager? That is very straightforward. To be honest, you need the Influx CLI tool installed. If it's on your path, then you don't need to do anything else. If it's not, then there's command line flags for you to tell it where the Influx CLI tool is installed. Other than that, we use Go currently it's written in Go, and you'll need Go to install it currently, but I will be adding kind of precompiled binaries hopefully in the near future. When will the Stack Manager be available? Very shortly. I will get that opened up. I'll get that opened up publicly next hour, hopefully. Okay. I just wanted to do this and introduce it first. Okay, the dashboard configs look like K8 resources. Can I push them with K8 tooling, Argo CD, etc.? That is a very good question, and honestly, not something I know the answer to. We use Argo here, and it's quite feasible. Honestly, I'm going to. We don't use it to push our dashboards and things currently, but that is something that may be possible. I'll need to look into that, and if anybody wants to discuss that over on Slack, we can have a look. So yeah.
Wow, cool, Andy. That was really good. Well, I have a couple questions. I think we all agree that YAML scares all of us, not just you. But I have to say that I don't know why I didn't think about this before, but recording that live demo session, that was really smart. because every time I've ever done a
just,
live session, I panic. I can't type. Nothing goes right.
I, I can't tell you how many takes I did, Chris, and I still couldn't type right. So I think I
think it
should have
was
just.
really, really
I think I should have just done it live and just accepted it. It wasn't going to be perfect. Yeah.
But I've always talked about how our InfluxDB templates are a real time saver, and it includes all the configurations for your dashboards and potentially your telegraph configs. I always thought it was easy, but seeing this Stack Manager tool made me realize that that's making things even easier. So, what was the inspiration behind this?
Honestly, the inspiration is that I don't like to deal with big YAML files. That's ultimately, and we do have great tooling. The Flux team have spent a lot of time. So, like the plugins for VS Code and things like that are great. So working with Flux, running your queries from your editor, the automatic Flux formatting. There's so much great stuff, great support for working with Flux. It seems silly not to take advantage of that, and you can't do that if it's all 6 levels of indentation deep inside a YAML file. It just doesn't work. So yeah. So we want when we come to edit those, we want it to be easy, and we want it to be. You want to be able to work with it in a productive way. So yeah. I should say, by the way, this doesn't rule out all of the community templates and all those kind of things at all. I think we've got an enormous amount of kind of collective wisdom that has kind of aggregated in all these community templates, and they're great. And what it might be, though, is that you want to take one of these community templates, start off as like that's your starting point, create your dashboards, create your buckets, create your telegraph, but chances are at some point you're going to want to venture away from that. You want to kind of customize that. Your individual setup is likely to be different to everybody else's. So you're going to want to have different alerts. You're going to want to have slightly different tasks and so on. So you can still use all of the community templates, all of those kind of things it's just the same way as before. You can apply those, you create the resources, but then when you get to the point you want to start customizing those things, add them to a stack, or if there isn't a stack there already, and then you can use a stack manager to help you start customizing them to your own needs.
And it looks like a really easy way to be able to make those customizations with a team of people. So, because a lot of times people will say, well, what did you change? Oh, I just changed, the dashboard. But what specifically did you change? And I love that you can actually call out and say, hey, this query, right? This is the only thing I changed.
Yeah, it's large diffs in YAML files where you're having to kind of, just to work out what chart you're in, having to go back and kind of just keep clicking that button in GitHub that expands the next 10 rows to then go, and then it's got axes and so on, and you just keep it. It's just, it could be a lot easier. So
I thought that was brilliant. And looking at the Slack channel, looks like a lot of other people think so too. So besides the precompiled binaries, what are some other things that you're planning on adding into this tool?
So my kind of, one of the first things I'd like to get, I need to get a Docker build out, because I'd really like it if people in their CI/CD could just use the Docker image that has the Influx CLI tool already built, has the stack manager already built, installed, and then you can just encircle CI or whatever platform you use, can just check out your code, push it, with no real problems. Make that really simple for people. So Docker build is absolutely one thing I'm interested in. The other thing is potentially templating. I need to think about this a little bit. It's a rocky path. Once you start writing templates to create templates, but there is certainly the use case where we might have different clusters and so on. Like we use the same dashboards in different kind of Influx clusters, and it may be we want to set alerting limits differently in different clusters. So we might want to set, we might want to be able to inject some values into the Flux code from like a kind of a data file that we have. So we can say, right, well, to this, push my templates up to this cluster using this data, and we'll inject that alert limit or whatever, and do the same for a different cluster, but with a different value. So those are kind of the two main things that I'm thinking about, and I'm sure, hopefully the community, if they take this on board and they want to use it, they will suggest some other things that we may want to do.
Oh, they definitely will.
Yeah.
They definitely will. But I think once again, it just shows that open spirit that we have at InfluxDB. I mean, you mentioned at the very top of your presentation, we like to dog food a lot of our projects. You guys were doing it in the InfluxDB cloud environment. But then, to turn into a tool and then share that tool in an open source way is just super admirable. And I'd say, kudos to you and the team. I think it's really cool that you did that.
Well, let's be honest. We want Influx to be an easy to use platform. We want it to be an enjoyable thing to use. We don't want people frustrated. We've hit those frustrations, and if we can help people out so that they don't do the same and they don't have these same things, or they, even worse, they duplicate the effort.
Yeah.
And there's no point. We've done it. We've because we're probably one of the first ones there, but we've made the effort. It costs nothing to share, so yeah, let's make things easier for everybody.
Awesome. So when you do open up the repo, please put it in the Slack channel, because I know everybody's anxiously waiting.
I will do.
And then everybody who's on here, you guys all know Andy now, so feel free to reach out to him via Slack or GitHub. I'm sure he'd love to hear feedback. He'd love to hear your feature requests, and just how you're getting on with using that tool in general. Andy, thank you so much for your time today. This was awesome.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
All right.